Ukraine today may be Asia tomorrow. A stark warning from Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. He made the comments in an interview with the Washington Post, and they come as the Japanese Prime Minister tours 5 G7 nations. Today's stop was London. Kishida and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak signed a major defense pact allowing the deployment of the troops in each other's countries. Josh Rogin is a global opinions columnist at the Washington Post. He spoke to the Japanese Prime Minister shortly before his trip. Mr. Rogin is in Washington. Thank you so much for joining our program.
Great to be with you.
And we're happy to have you. Obviously, part of the reason we're discussing this is because the Japanese Prime Minister is on his way to Canada right now. Now, as all of this is happening, as you cover in your piece, Japan is embarking on its biggest military buildup since the Second World War. Prime Minister Kishida told you just a couple of days ago, quote, "Ukraine today may be Asia tomorrow." It's a very striking sentiment. Help us understand his fear.
Right. Well, Japan, like many countries around the world, is emerging from 3 years of COVID-imposed isolation. And when they look around their region, they see a world changed. They see the strategic environment totally different from the one that they left in 2020. And what they see is China and North Korea amassing a military arsenal that they cannot contend with. And then they see Ukraine and Russia, and their conclusion is that whatever deterrence we told ourselves about, whatever we thought about the things that were stopping dictators from attacking democracies, were apparently not right. Apparently, dictatorships are in the business of attacking democracies, and if Russia can do it, then China can do it. So they made this huge decision to toss off 6 decades of relative pacifism, increase their defense budget by double, and they're asking the rest of the West, who they've now thrown their lot in, to join them in this level of seriousness and urgency, because they fear that if Russia can attack Ukraine, then China can attack Taiwan, and we ought to be ready as a means of increasing the deterrence and hopefully avoiding the war.
You talk to a lot of observers as well for your piece. Is your sense that the Prime Minister and the government are really sort of leading this view, or is that a more widely held perspective?
Right. Well, the poll numbers show in Japan that this move has majority support, somewhere between 55 and 60%, depending on the poll. But what's shocking, really, is that this is being done by a government led by Prime Minister Kishida, who is from the liberal wing of the ruling party. This move was actually planned by Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated. And if the hawkish Japanese Prime Minister had tried to remilitarize Japan, there would have been a lot of objections. But perhaps it's because Kishida comes from the dovish side of the Japanese ruling party. He has the bona fides to get this through without much pushback. And the bottom line is that the Japanese people are scared. They're scared that what they see happening in Europe could easily happen in Asia, and that they won't be prepared. So reluctantly, they're supporting their government and doubling their defense budget, which is not an easy thing to do. And then they're looking to the West, especially the United States, UK, Canada, and the other G7 countries that Kishida will host in Hiroshima in May, and asking them to match their level of investment, because Japan can't do it alone, and the Chinese expansion is just that big. So either we're all going to do it together or not.
Well, that's what I'd like you to sort of run with for us. Obviously, this is of particular interest to Canadians who are expecting the Japanese Prime Minister to arrive tonight. The sort of more substantive part of the visit happens tomorrow. What should Canada expect based on what you were just saying?
I think Canada should expect the Japanese Prime Minister to make the argument for the liberal international world order, small L liberal international world order, that has underpinned peace and security around the globe more or less since World War II. And they believe that this is under threat from China and from Russia and from North Korea. And they're calling on all of the, let's say, middle powers, including the UK and France and Canada, to join them, because China's just too big and strong and rich to be countered alone. And soon China will have the largest military in the world and the largest economy in the world, bigger than the United States even. So it's in all of our interests to get on the same page. Again, the goal here is not to fight a war. The goal is to avoid the war. And the only way to do that in the eyes of the Japanese is to prepare for the war, and so that the Chinese won't even think about trying it.
I guess as Canada has recently released its Indo-Pacific strategy, this is something that the government, or certainly parts of our government, have been thinking about. It includes increased military presence in the region, particularly another frigate. I guess I just wonder how Canadians should see this sort of realignment you're talking about as Canada thinks about its place in that part of the world.
Right. Well, I think Canada's in the same position as a lot of European countries in that they're economically dependent on China. And there's a lot of people in Canada, as well as in Washington, that don't see any benefit in raising tensions with Beijing. At the same time, ignoring the problem won't make it go away. And if the Chinese Communist Party is determined to be aggressive, repressive, expansionist, and threatening the peace and stability of Asia, that affects Canada. Because if China attacks Taiwan, the world economy is going to go into the toilet, and Canada will be much, much worse off. So I think the way that Canadians might think about this is pay more now to avoid paying even more later. And what you're going to spend on defense now, although it's a tough pill to swallow in these economic times, is a lot less than if we fail to deter China, China attacks Taiwan, and then the entire world economy goes right down the tubes. That'll be even worse. So it's an investment. It's an insurance policy. And it's not going to be an easy sell in any country, but we're all in this together. I think that's the message that Japanese Prime Minister Kishida will deliver when he gets there.
The interview started with your dramatic warning from the Prime Minister. You're ending it on a dramatic note as well, but we appreciate you putting everything in perspective for us. Thank you very much. Josh Rogin of The Washington Post.
Anytime.